So our keynote is Salim Akoje to talk about this ILO GIZ think piece, and particularly on the financing aspects in the informal economy, dual VAT apprenticeships in the informal economy. And we are really happy to have three commentators: Robert Palmer, Markus Maurer, Xiang Yang.
And this presentation is drawn from Patrick Workin and myself's work on an ILO initiative where we've just published now the think piece on apprenticeship development, and of course you'll meet Patrick, I'm sure, in the course of the session. I know he's doing a breakout session. The think piece, as we understood it, it was designed to exemplify mechanisms that could be used to connect the building blocks for effective apprenticeships, right? To enhance efficacy and efficiency in skills development through apprenticeships. As I said, it's a collective effort with Patrick Burkar, with friendly reviews, that's Patrick's words, Christine Hoffman, Zarina Khan, Cheryl James, and Elise Voza in the earlier parts of this publication, which I think was a couple of months ago. It's premised on the assumption that we looked at social dialogue, governance, financing, and linking all these together between the formal and informal as building blocks of a quality apprenticeship system. Now, essentially, this is one chapter, chapter 4 of that publication. But as I will show also and mention later on in this presentation, that you can't see finance as distinct, as we all know, from social dialogue, governance, and other elements of the apprenticeship system. We used the case study approach, and we've had to rely on a whole range of people, for instance, Sybil from Namibia, and a whole range of other people to give us the information that we used in the case studies. So it was a way of strengthening the building blocks of the apprenticeship systems, and we used a range of, as we said, case studies. Now I want to jump right into financing, because that's where the crux of this particular presentation is at. Right. In support of the objective of a sustainable, effective, and efficient funding stream to support apprenticeship development, and in both the formal and informal sector, financing seems to be an important part. Sorry. So I seem to be hearing myself. Okay. Is it okay still? Right.
It's okay. You can continue.
Okay, I got it. Right. And we argue that finance, of course, was essential to the resilient and successful and effective apprenticeship system. Although not a standalone feature, as it impacts on and is impacted by a whole range of complementary mechanisms, social dialogue, governance, role clarification. So the whole gamut of other supporting what could be called enabling environment of effective apprenticeships need to come in play. So again, finance an important part, but it links up with a whole range of other elements that make up effective systems. It is, of course, often used as the first and last point of departure for effectiveness. So if something fails, yes, we don't have the finance, we don't have the resources. Before something starts, if we don't have the finances, it just doesn't happen. So it's a crucial part, but nevertheless, not a standalone. Right. So we did focus on financing as a building block for quality apprenticeships, and we saw that as crucial to the whole system. Right. The health warning that I want to also have us bear in mind is that it's even the case studies are not to be seen as separate as distinct and separate, and they are not the only ones. And I would want to reiterate that point. There are a whole range of others in Africa and the rest of the world that could be studied. We just chose those as for very sample. So there might be others in the room here that will say, hey, you know what, why wasn't this chosen? Again, we needed to look at some elements of some systems, and as you will see, we used particular case studies, right? What we wanted to do was to extract lessons from the cases rather than, and I would hope that we don't lead a discussion that will lead to an assessment of the case studies that I will mention now. But we do think that they offer an interesting way to revitalize funding systems for apprenticeship that gives space for alternative funding modalities, especially in the informal economy, in a novel and exciting manner. Probably different in the formal apprenticeship system dominated by supply side funding bias. Now, if you've been working in Africa and you've been working in TVET long enough, there has been a supply side bias, and whenever governments think about funding, that's where they go to the formal TVET sector. Now, the issue of formal and informal we can discuss at length and ad nauseum, but the reality is that informal economy has become the mainstream economy. I think the issue is now of what is mainstream and what is not. And because it's mainstream, I think it's I think pertinent that we are discussing it and we give much more attention to it. Please help me with the time. So I've actually lost time. So please, Christine, you just guide me along. Our point of departure. Okay, thanks. Our point of departure is the ILO's building block 4, which refers to shared and equitable funding, and the importance of equitable funding arrangements, as we know in the ILO Quality Apprenticeship Toolkit of 2017. The rationale for the shared cost structure is understanding that quality apprenticeship generates benefits for the public authorities, employees, and for apprentices themselves, and that therefore costs should be shared. Sharing costs ensures that responsibility for success is shared and the involvement of all parties is secured. We know about recommendation 208, which specifies that apprenticeship should be remunerated or otherwise financially compensated. Now, I want us to remember this towards the end as well, because one thing it does insert as essential is that cost sharing by apprenticeship is necessary, but it's in a different form. That they do accept that lower pay as part of the quid pro quo process, right? But in the informal sector, there are very different kind of rationale and thinking with regard to the cost sharing perspectives. Part of the funding challenge, as we argue in the African context, is the considerable dependence on donor-based initiatives. Some we have often found sometimes, if not often, simply not sustainable. So we looked at 2 case studies: Cote d'Ivoire, with its subsidized dual apprenticeship, which of course raises the issue of cost and affordability, which I'll go into detail in a moment, and Ghana with whatever is called, and I think it's still ongoing, the TVET voucher project, which of course would obviously raise red flags. I know amongst my colleagues, I refer here to Robert Pablo and others, which raises the issue of provider capacity bottlenecks in some regions, trades, and basically financial malfeasance that has been found in projects of this nature. So we had to look very carefully at what is it that we were looking at when we looked at voucher projects. But we saw lots of value, I must say, in this particular example. Right. First, Cote d'Ivoire. Right. PEGEDEC 2011, this is the name of the project, designed to operate within the informal economic fabric. Now, what's particularly crucial is that while there might be many projects in the informal economy, informal skills, it's not easy to find, because it is not sexy, it is not exciting, it's just not the done thing. So, I mean, the fact that here's a project that was specifically targeting the informal economy was quite exciting. The aim, it aimed at professionalizing traditional apprenticeships without replacing, importantly, without replacing or excluding it, right? Because the first port of call when it comes to the informal economy is people say, okay, how can we formalize? Now, that was pretty exciting and interesting, but I'll get to that later. It integrates intended to integrate existing training practices and structures in the informal sector by adding wage subsidies for young people, compensate for loss of income that would have happened as a matter of course, provided additional theoretical training, provided formal contracts, and importantly, a certification system. That's an important part of as we would argue, the whole upgrading of the informal skill system. Key features: target low skills, forgive me for the spelling error there, 18 to 24 years, combined work-based learning, informal with theory at an accredited center, crucial. 12 to 24 month apprenticeship was the duration, provided remuneration, as I said earlier, and popular trades were crafts, car mechanics, welding, masonry, boiler making. So in a sense, it was going to where the action was, where the economy was already robust, right? Again, it's a joint funded program between the government and the World Bank. So key achievements: a survey of 1,842 beneficiaries. The survey was barely quite extensive, and we were quite impressed, as we say in the paper. It was barely seen in education and training policies in Africa. Massive increase as a result of this in access to formal apprenticeships, with an increase of 71% compared to the control group. I'm talking there about employment. Net effect: about 0.75 additional apprenticeship places created per subsidized apprenticeship, which reflects a dynamic of real job creation and not a simple displacement of apprenticeships from the traditional to the formal apprenticeship system. So some real impacts, some important results from this initiative. Effects on the medium-term income of participants in the program are remarkable. 4 years after the start of the program, the beneficiaries receive an average of 15% more income than the control group, which was quite impressive. They also occupied positions involving more complex tasks, so often non-routine, indicating that there was a significant increase in skills and skills use. Of course, there were challenges to be named. There was an increased absenteeism. Palmer's wrote about that, and we'll hear from him later on. And of course, the prohibitive cost of such an initiative. Now, let me just quickly deal with the prohibitive costs. Dealing both in TVET is not cheap, right? It's going to be prohibitive. But given the fact that the informal economy, informal skills development has been organic, right? There's been absolutely no cost to government of that sector being so robust, means that, yes, if we want to move it up the value chain, we're gonna have to spend more money. So yes, you can argue that it is prohibitive, but not, I think we just have to evaluate the prohibitiveness, if I can use the word, of the cost of not doing this as compared to doing it, right? Do we not want to deal with a sector that has more than 80% of our people employed? Then we can say, okay, fine, it's prohibited. But not doing it is, I think, less than ingenious. Right, why we think this program succeeds? It's an innovative response to limitations of the traditional apprenticeship system. I prefer the use of the word traditional rather than informal, because it seems a bit more wishy-washy, but traditional seems to be a bit more organic in a sense. It shows that a targeted policy combining financial support, public-private partnerships, and structured support can sustainably transform access to employment for young people, including in economic environments dominated by the informal economy. Right. It removes both the financial obstacles weighing on young people enterprises and removes the lack of incentives for companies to train in transferable skills. Right? We know that there's a fear of poaching. This kind of initiative kind of gives some companies some degree of confidence to say, okay, fine, you know what, if I do train, yes, people will be moving to other places, but at least it's and not as costly and doesn't show on the bottom line as much as it needs to. All right, firms can afford to provide private training. Productivity growth led to increased outcomes. Led to increased incomes. Young people took on more complex tasks. There was a degree, as he argues, including abstract, moving them up the value chain of non-routine tasks. A great number of people obtained a certificate, also indicating some of the skills acquired were general and transferable. And structured the pathways, introducing qualifications at the end of the apprenticeship was pretty remarkable. So there was some clearly defined outcomes which were clearly impressive. Quickly
Salim,
through
you have 3 minutes.
Yeah. Oh my God, no. All right. Okay, I'll just go quickly through this Ghana training voucher project, and get to the end. If you'll allow me another 5, Christine, can you? I just quickly go through the Ghana. Right, thanks. Right. It was designed to meet the demand for upgrading informal apprenticeships. It was specifically upgrading master craftspersons and workers in SMEs and micro enterprises. It was CBT based, modular competency based, and it represented a significant response to the specific needs of the informal economy using CBT. Vouchers covers CBT delivery, cost of accredited training providers, important, assessment and certification by awarding bodies, as well as monitoring and coordination support. So it provides the whole gourmet of services needed to move people up the value chain. Right, key achievements quickly. Close to 15,000 beneficiaries have been issued training vouchers during the current cycle. CBT programs delivered by registered providers, upgrading role of GTVP, both apprentices and master staff were able to progress to proficiency levels 1 and 2. And project was facilitated by a web-based voucher management system, which I must say we found quite impressive in itself. Now, I know there's been challenges with regard to vouchers as such, but we think that the new technology will clearly help resolve some of those issues, while not all. But clearly, what we do think needs to happen with voucher projects of this nature is there has to be closer monitoring, evaluation, and kind of really close up evaluation of what is happening on the ground. But there is a degree of managed recognition. GTVP is valuing formal apprenticeship learning and is moving towards recognizing it formally, but in a structured, assessed, and selective way, rather than automatically granting full credit. Key challenges and response: initial cost of setup, dog challenge of financial malfeasance and ownership. Of course, we argue that there is a response and can be resolved effectively. Right. I just want to quickly go through the essential dimensions of the funding, which you'll see in the chapter. We ask the key questions, and there are 5, and the dimensions that covers, and it's important, right? What governments, all stakeholders need to particularly respond to? What precisely do we fund to improve apprenticeships, and why? What funding sources will be used, through which instruments, who leads and decides, what financial monitoring systems are in place? Those 5 questions underpin key to any apprenticeship initiative. Right. Financial, some success costs are clearly known. Costs of non-sponsors apprenticeships are clearly known too. The cost of inaction cannot be really underestimated, right? The cost of not doing anything is disastrous. So one needs to deal with the informal economy, and how you do it is, well, we've chosen 2 examples, and there's a whole range of others, I am sure.
dual in particular also in emerging countries, low and middle income countries. And I'm very curious to hear how you see the financing part from your end, and also with regard to what Salim just presented to us. Hand over to you, Markus.
Well, thank you so much, Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Thanks so much for inviting me here. It's a really a privilege to be able to comment here. I should also begin with a similar disclaimer as the one Salim already put forward. I'm not an education economist, and also in our guidance note, Christine, you have been mentioning a guidance note that we have been producing on apprenticeship training. In this guidance note, we do not address financing in a specific or in a systematic way, but nevertheless, it's an issue that we have been addressing as well. And so it's a bit against this backdrop that I allow myself to comment on this think piece, which I like a lot. So Salim and Patrick, my congratulations on this piece. I think it really offers a lot of highly valuable insights, and it has a lot of important messages. But one of the core messages also strongly resonates with our guidance note. Apprenticeship design must be anchored in the highly diverse realities of sectors, enterprises, and education and training systems. And this requires, and I think that's what you show, and that's also what we will be trying to show in our guidance note, this requires careful analysis rather than the application of standard models. And Salim has also emphasized just now in his presentation that financing issue is not a standalone issue, but it's not distinct, but it's tightly, it's very much intertwined with virtually all other dimensions of apprenticeships. One core observation that you have also been making throughout the report, and also very much now in on your closing slide, that apprenticeships, informal apprenticeships, have not only been like a traditional model of training, but they have also been a very cost-efficient training model. You write at some place, equipment and learning materials are readily available at the workplace at nil or almost nil costs. And I think that's an important statement to make also in being aware that the aim of quality apprenticeships of ILO recommendation 208 is to go beyond such traditional informal apprenticeship and to try to develop them step by step. But this also makes us aware of the fact that all these different dimensions of quality apprenticeships, be it off-the-job training, the development of curricula, of assessment, but also regulation that comes with that, all of this inevitably generates additional direct and indirect costs. So in view of financial constraints that we are aware of in most contexts, I think prioritization is unavoidable also in view of financing. And I think here the report provides an interesting and very relevant hint. It emphasizes the importance of recognition and assessment, which require dedicated resources. So your point is here, there may be other elements of quality apprenticeships that are important, which are resource intensive, but recognition and assessment is definitely one element of apprenticeships, of quality apprenticeships, that needs particular attention also from a financing perspective. One additional message that you have provided us with is that there are multiple funding sources needed in very many contexts. So that it's not about building up one single pot, but it's about accessing different sources of financing. And of course, that's something we already know from different contexts, including I'm sitting here in Zurich in Switzerland. This is a reality here as well. I mean, VET, vocational education and training, apprenticeships have like different dimensions and different structures, and all of these are being financed in the case of Switzerland as well through different kind of financing budgets, including the one in the case of Switzerland recently also from migration budgets. To end with, if I don't know, Christine, do I have another minute or 2 minutes?
Half a minute.
Half a minute. Okay. Stakeholder incentives must remain central. I think that's absolutely core. That's something which you have also emphasized. So employers engage financially also if they benefit from it. One message from my side is also, if we with apprenticeships have focus very much on social policy objectives, then public financing remains essential. I think that's also one of the points Salim has made in the end. And also we must be aware of the hidden costs of regulations. So I think that's one core aspect, and perhaps that's something which you have not been talking about so much throughout the report, or also in the report. I personally think that's an extremely important aspect. So if we try to regulate apprenticeships more, it will also create more costs, for instance, for the SMEs. That's something which we also need to be aware of. So that's my last point. Thank you so much.
And good morning, Xiaoyan. It is indeed still very early morning, so thanks for your commitment to join us in this webinar and this BarCamp. So Xiaoyan is from the World Bank, and as you've heard, one of the examples Salim was giving was from a World Bank funded and supported a project in Cote d'Ivoire. So Xiaoyan is the lead education and TVET specialist of the World Bank, and hence does not only work in Africa, but has considerable experience in countries in Africa as well, and will provide some global views as well from the World Bank, a big player in the field of financing, and in more recent years, more so also in the informal economy. So over to you, Xiaoyan. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Christine and colleagues. Hope you can hear me.
Yes. Yeah.
I was a bit late in signing in to the conference. I think time was a bit mixed up. Apologies. But I did catch the second half of the presentation by Salim. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Salim, for a very nice think piece and very thoughtful. I have to say that the World Bank operates in different verticals. I'm from the education group, and we tend to work more with the formal training and the formal education system. But we do have another vertical, colleagues that work on social protection, that tends to deal with more apprenticeships. But over the last few months, we are talking a lot more about integrated approach, the whole World Bank. Thus, actually, we are reflecting a lot more about non-formal training and apprenticeship. So your piece is really timely. And I have to say that very many strong points from the think piece. Number one is that it really recognize, especially for Africa, informal apprenticeship indeed is a dominant form of training, because we do have more than about 80%, at least, percent of the labor force are in the informal sector. And perhaps, I think the last I remember, the number is about 15% of the workforce only is engaged in the formal wage employment sector. So I think it's important to recognize that. And we tend to forget, especially I think from the education group in the World Bank, we tend to focus a lot more on the formal training. So I very much appreciate. And another thing is to say that, yes, even though it is dominant, but we have to recognize that it needs to be thought of as part and parcel of the education and skill ecosystem. In fact, how much formalization, how quickly to formalize is relevant for every country system. And so I appreciate that. Another thing is to focus on the not just the design of informal training, but also the incentives on the institutions who delivers, who has incentive to deliver. It's an important point. But I want to quickly actually offer a few points for reflection, especially as we think about informal apprenticeship for Africa, for the youth. We know we have, I think it's about 1 billion youth coming of age and looking for jobs. And the thing with informal apprenticeship is that, yes, of course, they do get jobs, most of them, depending how you define jobs. But we have to look at the quality of their jobs and the growth aspect of the jobs. Africa is a continent where the basic education, the foundational learning, in fact, we use the number learning poverty. We tend to say 80% of the graduates from basic education still are classified as learning poor, meaning that not able to read or comprehend a very basic text when they're 14 years old, or when they're 10 years old, when they reach 4th grade. So it's important to bear that in mind, that informal apprenticeship, while they work, give them temporary jobs, they tend to be not very good quality jobs. And these youth have very little prospect to grow into their jobs. So I think it's important to recognize that formalization may be costly, may be a long-term agenda, but it needs to be on the agenda. And even though we cannot do it right away, very quickly, but I think it's important to build in the think piece, some kind of bridging, and maybe a pilot, maybe, as you say, that an opportunistic way to add to what is already existing and identify some specific pieces. As you mentioned, Salim, it's important to sort of give that more prominence, that formalization is important for quality of jobs, for growth of those youth. Another point is that one of the limitations about informal apprenticeship, I don't know if it's emphasized in the think piece, is that the limited jobs. If we don't have the demand side, if we don't have the job demand and sufficient number of small medium enterprises that can offer such informal apprenticeships, it's really its value is quite limited in informal apprenticeship, because we've seen other systems, even under the formal education training system, but if you have the right incentives, you can design informal training for youth, for NEET, through the formal education system, which actually can provide, can link with them with better quality jobs, and can sort of bring them back into the education training system. So to think about is the demand side, and how do we overcome the challenge of the not having enough jobs, not have enough SMEs, and not have enough opportunities even for informal apprenticeship. And then finally is about financing. I know we have a breakout session to talk about resilient financing. That is for us, we look at both how much funding is available, how we mobilize non-governmental sources. That means from the industries, from the employers, but also from the social organizations, from all parts of the society. But it's also important to think about how we use the money to maximize impact. I'm talking more about how do we use results-based financing, even for informal apprenticeships, focusing on results such as coverage, but also quality of apprenticeships, results or employment job outcomes of such apprenticeships. So finally, I just want to quickly conclude that I think it's important to focus on quality for informal apprenticeships, inclusion, and better jobs over time. These are important challenges. We hope to discuss more in the breakout session. I'll stop here. Over to you, Christine.
Last but not least, there is Robert Palmer, PhD from Edinburgh University, and really long-standing experience, I think over 20 years of Tibet experiences, different research analysis to be done, focusing on Tibet in the informal economy, but also financing of informal apprenticeships. So I think a big source also for us to hear your comments on this topic on financing. So Robert, please let us know what you think about all that.
Thanks very much, and good to be here. So the think piece obviously encourages policy learning from case studies, and I'd like to build on that in my remarks. Obviously, this whole discussion around financing Tibet and informal economies is very important, but it's not a new one. It's important to recognize that. I mean, in fact, the discussion is about 50 years old, right? And it's still going strong. You know, very soon after the formal acknowledgement of there actually being an informal sector in the early 1970s, there was program after program, particularly from the 1980s onwards, trying to support and upgrade informal apprenticeships by making them more structured. And of course, these included financing approaches. So I'd like to, in the spirit of the think piece and using case studies, rapidly go through sort of 10 lessons learned from past experiences of financing dual vet and informal economies. And as a starting point, you know, take that as has been said by Shoyan, I think Marcus as well, informal apprenticeship training is the dominant mode of skills training in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. It's already at scale. It's already sustainable. The challenge, of course, and why we're here is that there's a lot of deficits in that model in terms of access, quality, and relevance, right? So, I mean, in terms of taking that as a starting point, the first lesson is to really fully understand what you already have, right? What does the current market look like? Who finances what? And what deficits exist? When you ignore who already pays, you risk unintended effects. You risk crowding out financing which is already there, right? The governments, in most cases, cannot pay the full cost of replacing what funding already exists, right? So don't crowd out what already exists. Try and complement it. Lesson 2 is to match the binding constraint you've identified with the appropriate financing mechanism, okay? So whether it's to do with entry or retention, or whether it's to do with quality, opportunity costs, there's different financing tools for different types of issues faced in a particular context. Lesson 3, tons and tons and tons and tons of donor projects over the last decades on this topic, right? Unfortunately, and frankly, they rarely change the system, right? Without there being a domestic financing pathway. In most cases, there aren't domestic financing pathways which are built into these projects. So, you know, you have 2 to 4 year interventions, which is the typical duration of donor-funded interventions, and then these things fade away, they get forgotten about, and then the next one comes along, right? So lesson 4 is often in these approaches that there's been an underfunding of workplace components. Lesson 5, vouchers are the common mechanism, common instrument which is used, and these can strengthen accountability, but only if there's administration and verification mechanism which are strong. They can encourage competition, but only if there's real choice of providers. Lesson 6, financing system level issues like assessment, certification, and RPL tends to yield higher returns because you're leveraging the existing system, right? You're building what already is there in the informal system. Lesson 7. So typically, a lot of these interventions try to, go beyond informal apprenticeship and think about, what does the person do once they finish their apprenticeship? And, you can call these sort of, finance plus approaches. And the evidence of many projects, again, points to things like lender reluctance to support graduates after this. So making that link to work afterward is really important. Lesson 8, I'm almost there. Lesson 8. So the nature of informal enterprises, their fragmentation, how many there are the dominant mechanisms for enterprise formation in most countries in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, means that reaching them means that you have to go through intermediaries in most cases, right? Otherwise, transaction costs become too prohibitive. And just finally, 2 quick lessons. Lesson 9 is recognize the politics in all this. This is often forgotten, but often the most important thing, right? Politics and TVET go hand in hand, like, I don't know what, make it up yourself. But politicians and policymakers love TVET because they think that skills equals work. Right? They don't by themselves. Skills do not equal work, right? A lot of other things need to happen in the ecosystem for this relationship to actually work. And politicians jump on TVET. They like to finance short-termist approaches, and this leads into unsustainable financing approaches, including with dual TVET. And the very last lesson is don't forget to look at your lessons from your own countries, right? There were many, many attempts in your own countries that have existed over the last decade to support and finance dual VAT. So, look at what you've got already. Remember that institutional memories are short, and good luck.
Thank you so much for all the 3 commentators on these really very rich inputs.